So thank you so much, Justin, for joining us.
Pleasure to join you as well. I really appreciate what your organization is doing because we need these resources to come to us. There's a bit of a fractured relationship between our community and healthcare, whether it be medical health or mental health. So I think coming to us is a way to rebuild that trust and to normalize it.
Absolutely, 110%. Before we get into it, because I'm a talker and I can go and ramble.
Oh,
But before
me too. Me too. So we'll have to figure something out.
Before we get started, though, can you let people know who you are, what you do, and how they can find you?
Absolutely. So, hello, everyone. I am Dr. Justin Hopkins. I go by Justin or Dr. Hop, whichever one you prefer. It's totally fine with me. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist in Washington, D.C., Virginia, as well as Maryland. But my office is located in D.C. I operate my own psychotherapy practice where I work with adults as well as couples and majority folks of color or other folks who identify in some ways as being on the margins or as a minority in some fashion. I find that therapy is so beneficial to everyone. It allows us to be our most authentic self in a world that often sends us messages telling us that we can't be, that we have to be something different, that we have to reject parts of ourselves and reject the things that we love that could bring us fulfillment. So therapy can really liberate us. And so I'm really proud to be a part of that movement for liberation, but first liberating our minds. I can be found at drjshopkins.com. That's DRJ, S as in Scott, my middle name, Hopkins, HOPKINS.com. And that's also my Instagram. So drjshopkins, as well as my Twitter. I've tried to make it easy.
There you go.
So it's consistent.
All about branding.
Email, Instagram, yeah, and Twitter. So that's me in a nutshell.
Yeah, I love that. So yeah, let's talk about it. Let's get into it. I think we've had some conversation around mental health, and I think that more people are talking about mental health now and being open to it, especially since the year that we had last year, which we all were like, oh my God, what is this? And you have more celebrities and people coming out talking about their own mental health, where people or men may start feeling a little bit more comfortable to open up to the possibility of going to therapy or actually seeking out therapy. When we get there, right? Or if someone is thinking, okay, I may want to go to therapy, what would you say is the first step for them?
The first step is just that, knowing that you may want or need to go. And I think that's one of the biggest barriers, right? There's that saying, the first step to resolving an issue is recognizing that you have one. And just that in itself can be such a huge barrier, particularly for Black men, because it's kind of a mark against us or some sort of stain on our record as a man that if we need help or if we are struggling in some sort of way, it's really messed up. I think it's even barbaric that men are not allowed to struggle or need help. We're human, so obviously there will of course be situations where we need other people and need help. So that's step one: is being comfortable within yourself enough to recognize that you may have areas where you want to grow, like we all do. That is a human condition. We are all enough, inadequate, and also beautifully imperfect. Right. And we can also want to improve and grow ourselves. So if we can accept that and recommend that without diving into shame and guilt, you're in a good place to get started. Next, I would say consider what kind of therapist you're looking for. There are some therapists who, and that includes identity as well, right? So gender, race, if those things are important to you, and they often are for many of us in our communities, then you can start there, right? By looking for someone that you think you might connect with a little bit more for whatever reason that might be, whatever it is. I think it's important to know why you might prefer a man as opposed to a woman or a non-binary person. I think it's also important to know why you would prefer someone who is Black or a person of color, right? And be aware of those answers and preferences so that you can be honest with yourself about what you're worried about or concerned about coming into the experience, and also what you're expecting. I would say also, you can start by thinking about whether you want to pay with insurance, or if you outright, you can pay with insurance via your out of network if your therapist doesn't take your insurance, or you can pay right completely out of pocket, right? Whatever category best fits for you, whether it be paying that copay, the therapist is taking your insurance, or working with a therapist who works with out of network insurance, you can get either reimbursed or only pay a fraction of the cost, or someone who doesn't take insurance at all, doesn't work with any, who's paying out of pocket. Know what's going to work for you. And there are therapists available in each category, but it does differ. And then lastly, I would say start looking on some of these websites, right? And yours is such a beautiful example, right? There are so many directories now, and also just not enough that center Black therapists,
Yeah.
right? So there's like psychologytoday.com, but it's kind of hard to like weave through and find African American therapists. So I think directories like yours are incredibly useful, so that we can start looking for, if you want a therapist of color right off the bat, this is really a good place to start looking.
Absolutely. So I like that you brought up multiple areas of barriers that a man or anyone will possibly run into when it comes to insurance or internally, and just even to get to the point of awareness of where I am currently in my life and wanting to seek support in that time. So when we are having those barriers of awareness, not wanting to be aware, or like, I don't think that's not me. I don't have that issue. What are we seeing, or what have you seen a lot when it comes to men in coming to therapy?
Yeah. This is heavy. And I think it is so incredibly layered. And it is a systemic self-alienation by how we're socialized, right? And it's things that we've all heard before. There's a lot of conversation around toxic masculinity, right? People who have been on the wrong side of a man's actions, right? Women in our society, men as well, right, have been kind of labeling and calling out, the wounds and the cause of those wounds, and toxic masculinity falls under it, which is for good reason. I think it's also important that we celebrate masculinity and also recognize what it is that causes the issues around masculinity and for men, and develop some empathy. And that is the one thing that I think we are sorely needing, men, that we don't actually recognize that we even need. We struggle to put words to our wounds, and then we struggle to address those wounds. So what I mean by this is like the systemic self-alienation, again, we've all heard of this, right? Boys don't cry.
Yeah.
Right? Be tough, be a man. And imbued in those three words, right? Be a man, is that you're not allowed to feel or be upset. You better be completely self-sufficient. You should be able to produce and provide, protect others, right? And basically be kind of a robot.
Right.
What it means to be human is to feel. What it means to be human is to go through life and to struggle and sometimes suffer. That's a part of the human condition. And yet for men, right, we're taught to deny those experiences because it's inevitable that everyone's going to experience it. It's just that when we experience it, it sends us into identity conflict. So we have to deny it. We have to stifle those feelings. And for many of us, we spend a lifetime is just stuffing it down until it really can rot from the inside or boil over and cause tremendous trouble in our lives. And some of us, we learn to do it so seamlessly that we're just not even aware of what we feel. We don't have the language. We're not aware of the feeling. And so we just struggle to communicate around what's actually happening to us. So we become a stranger to ourselves, right? So I think for a lot of men in therapy, particularly Black men, because gender roles and really rigid gender expectations are superimposed on people of color, superimposed. So for Black men, right, there's a lot of I wouldn't say necessarily stoicism, but a lot of self alienation and unawareness around those softer emotions. And that's what causes a lot of the trouble for us when we come to therapy. There are men who come in and who have said, it's who over time in therapy, over several months of being in therapy, recognize that they've been living like the walking dead. That's the quote. Or they feel actually like a stranger to themselves. Or they find it alarming just how much they realize that they've been disconnected from their emotions. And the truth is emotions are information. They're information about our subjective experience. They don't speak the rational language because they're layered in so many other things that are unconscious. If we take the time to kind of understand what it is that we feel, then we can actually be informed about what we might need, right? What hurts, and come up with ways to resolve it, right? You unlock these negotiating, problem solving, this language, right? If we can sit with and try to understand what it is that we feel, but instead we're socialized to ignore all of that material. So we're walking around uninformed without access to that information. And that makes it hard to communicate, it's hard to connect. So many different things. So it's very troubling for us. And it's such a challenge. And it takes a tremendous amount of courage, I think, for men to go to therapy, turn all of those false, inhumane expectations on their head, to stand in their masculinity and their manhood and their femininity, and actually be human, be whoever you are, feel however you feel, and accept those things as they come up, knowing that you deserve that kind of acceptance from yourself as well as others.
Absolutely. I love all of that. And it made me think about, like you said, it's how we were raised, right? It's what
Right.
what was taught to us, and then having society also impede on that, and it just, like you said, just created a bunch of different layers. How are you
Mhm.
telling, or what would you tell a parent or that is saying like, hey, I don't want this for my child. I want them
Mhm.
to not experience this and have a different experience than I had. What would be some things, or have you already told some of your clients, like, hey, here are maybe three things that you can start doing now that you can change that trajectory?
Yeah, sure, sure. For a lot of us, one way I've described it to some patients is that we a lot of us men, we kind of take flight into the rational mind and just kind of put aside the emotional and creative mind. Um, and right, so we can be really concrete, and we stigmatize emotion as some sort of secondary, unsophisticated process, right? When you mention emotion, it's almost like synonymous with too much emotion. Like to
Right.
say you're feeling anything is to say you're feeling too much,
Uh-huh.
which again, if you're not feeling anything, you're dead. And a lot of us are numbing inside. And I would say in some ways that that's analogous if you're not sensing what it is you're experiencing. So I would say the way that I've described it is that for a lot of us, we kind of go from A to C and miss B, right? They could be a particular, an A being a particular experience or an activating event, and then B being your experience of it in terms of your emotions, right? Like how the emotional experience that comes up in response to it, and then C being what you do about it, right? So for us, it's kind of like, well, if you're a man, you got to get things done, you got to solve problems, and you got to produce, right? Create an outcome. But we have to slow down to try to process what's happening because we can actually create better outcomes and resolve more problems when we're better informed about what's happening for us. So when we're tempted to go from A to C to doing, right, from problem to doing, a lot of times, particularly when it comes to relationships and more complicated problems around personal life, we got to slow down in that B area. And that's where we get uncomfortable. If we can kind of tolerate that discomfort for a little bit, a little bit longer and really kind of think about it and reflect on it, and oftentimes it does take a therapist to help one do that, we can really learn a lot about ourselves and come up with even more sufficient ways of problem solving. So to do that, right, there's many things that you can do. You can journal. You can try to be mindful of any time a problem is presented in your personal life in particular. And when you feel compelled to act, before acting, pause and just ask yourself, how am I feeling? What am I feeling? Why am I feeling? Try to take a moment to just process that middle area before you move on to acting.
Yeah, I think that's important. I talk about that a lot to my clients, and I try to also even post on social media. It's like I think that we all should do a self check in daily,
Oh
not just
yeah,
when an event
absolutely.
occurs, like daily. You're on your lunch break or whatever. Just check
Yeah.
in with yourself. What am I feeling right now? What do I need
Oh,
right now? What do I need to give myself right now? I think if we start making that more of a habit, it won't seem so foreign for us to check in on our emotions and feel that, like, what am I
yeah.
experiencing? You know?
Yeah, yeah, that's really important. That's such a good point, right? To like check in with yourself. We don't think about it like this, but we
No,
have a relationship with ourselves.
exactly.
That's the number one relationship that we're in all the time, constantly. We have thoughts that are communicating messages to ourselves about ourselves that, many of which we're not even in control of or aware of, but certainly impact us daily. And I think for a lot of men, that's just a whole new idea because the way that we are socialized is to not care about ourselves,
Right.
not care about how we feel because we shouldn't feel that in the first place, and we just are supposed to push through, right? So it's definitely a cycle. I think that begins with a real lack of empathy for oneself, and then sometimes even for others. And so I think it starts with acknowledging that you have a self, a relationship with yourself, and it's good to check in with you.
Absolutely. So if we get past that barrier, right? Okay, I'm checking in. I'm here. I'm ready. I'm ready to move forward. What are some barriers that one might encounter with um, actually having access to therapy?
Right. So this goes back to some of the things that I mentioned around insurance and finances. There was a recent study, I believe it was in the Wall Street Journal. It came no surprise to me or any of my colleagues uh, that therapy is 5 times as likely to be out of network with your insurance than is primary care.
Wow.
And part of the reason for that is because this is an article that just came out in the Wall Street Journal. And part of the reason for that is because insurance companies are very much part of the stigmatization of mental health and mental health treatment. They often inundate therapists with obscene amounts of paperwork, try to micromanage the treatment, and and also demand an unreasonable amount of justification for treatment. I even see this happen when patients are applying for family medical leave from their job or short-term disability, right? They want every single note that you've written and all sorts of treatment plans prove that this person needs this treatment. And mental health isn't like a broken leg. I can't show you an x-ray. I describe the symptoms, I tell the diagnosis, I communicate how this treatment can be useful to them, and still a lot of the times they want more.
Hmm.
And it's really, really it's really, really hard for therapists who work for themselves, as many do, to actually make a living that way. The other part is that insurance companies grossly underpay therapists. For social workers, for psychologists, for licensed counselors, so many kind of choose to go the route of not accepting insurance or being out of network, and that just does a serious disservice. I know a lot of Black clinicians, myself included, who may go into private practice or set up their business not necessarily take insurance, but deeply wrestle with that because we know what that can mean, right? And so there's people go into this work not for the money. but they love people.
Definitely
It's
not the money.
definitely
Okay.
it's not for the money, right? This is not the field to get rich, right?
No, it's not. It is not.
We do it because we love the work.
Right.
We love the work. We're fascinated by people. We enjoy getting to know people, enjoy the feeling of helping people, um, learning people. I mean, it truly is an honor to be the person who's trusted with some people's, deepest secrets. And I really do take that seriously. Confidentiality is like, my friends know, like, don't ask me nothing about like who is like, don't ask me nothing, right? If they're a relative of somebody I'm seeing, the wall's right here, right? So I won't even acknowledge whether they're working with me or not. I'll just say I can't confirm or deny, whichever way, if they're working with me or not. So, I think a lot of us bring a passion to this work, but therapists also struggle with trying to make the decision to make a living for themselves while also while also treat the people in their community, particularly if you're a Black person, right? So that's one of the issues. There really is systemic change that needs to happen. Therapists need to be compensated better. And I think also, we need more Black therapists. There's a lot more that are in school and graduating and becoming part of the field. We've been through a lot. Our people have been through a lot. Generationally, we've been handed down a lot. And I think we, of all people, can benefit from therapy. I wish it was part of our reparations package that we just come with like free lifetime therapy. I just feel like that should be a thing, I'm not suggesting that, but I'm suggesting that should just be, so whoever's watching this, just consider that. But that is a problem, right? But I'm happy to see that there are more clinicians going into the field, and I'm seeing even more Black male clinicians come into the field. But we certainly need more, and a lot of our folks are just not going to trust someone unless they're a person of color.
Yeah, that's true. But yeah, we really do need more because even like in my grad program, I think it was only 2 males that was in my grad program, and I'm like.
Yeah.
But they got all the jobs, right? Everybody was like, "Oh please, oh please, oh please,"
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah,
it's one of the few professional fields, healthcare fields, where we're a minority and sorely needed. And I really wish I had more male colleagues to refer to.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've gotten past the awareness. We've gotten past like, okay, these are some barriers that I might run into. But let's say I find a therapist and I think this person is a good match for me. Do you suggest trying to call to figure out if it's a good fit, or do you think they should just go in head on and just take whoever is available, just take them and go?
So I heard 2 questions. One is if like you find somebody who you think is a match, should you just go ahead and meet with them, or should you just take who's available and try it out? Mm-hmm. Both can be fine. Here's why. So once you get past like accepting what you're dealing with enough to know that you could use some help, and finding a therapist, working it out with your insurance, right? And by the way, just a note, you can call your insurance to find a list of therapists to take your insurance in your area. Once you get past all that, right? Really, the key is to determine whether you're going to have a positive experience with the therapist or not. You got to get to know them, and they have to get to know you. You got to feel out, rather not get to know them necessarily, because therapists don't typically disclose too much about themselves, to leave space for you, leave space for the person. But you got to kind of try it out and fill out the space. See what it feels like. Be aware of what it feels like. Talk about what it feels like. That's the biggest part, right? So, for example, if you find a therapist, you're seeing them in that first session, it doesn't really feel like, they're making enough space or hearing you, or they're giving you solutions that don't quite fit, right? Go back to that second session and say, hey, this is what I was feeling in the first session. this is what I think I'm needing from you. And a good therapist ought to be able to hear that, because a good therapist knows that it's not about them. It's not about them. People are infinitely unique. And it's the therapist's job to kind of learn what your particular needs are, and to try to kind of hear and match those needs to the degree feasible. And if they know that they can't, then they can refer you out. For example, I'm trained in cognitive behavioral therapy, dialectical behavioral therapy, cognitive processing therapy, but I practice strictly psychodynamically, which is all about the processes and issues beneath the symptoms, right? Symptoms are signs of larger issues, right? And so it's about understanding and working through the issues that give rise to the signs, right? And so someone who wants to kind of say, like, give me the 3 steps to like not feel this way again, I will let them know how that may not align necessarily with the way that I work and how I practice. And I'll have colleagues in my Rolodex to refer to who do more of that tool strategy focused treatment. And then there are other times where I kind of blend a little bit of that in, because it's not too far fetched from what I'm comfortable providing, and what I know how to do. So it really depends. And I think people have got to get in there and just feel out the connection between you and the therapist, and be willing to talk about your experience as you experience it, to course correct where needed or possible.
I love that. I think this is awesome. The whole thing. I think we've taken them on a journey of like awareness,
Yeah, right.
finding, and then when you're there.
Yeah, it's a challenge, right? It's a journey, and if you think about it, that relationship with your therapist, it's so different from any other relationship, because it literally is just focused on you. And the therapist is trying to even use their own experience and emotions and perspectives to kind of inform themselves about what's happening between you, the two of you, and what's happening for the patient, right? So it really is about the patient. And yet at the same time, there's a lot of work to be done to build that rapport. And that rapport is the most important thing. I don't care what kind of therapy you do, right? That's what the research has said for decades and decades and decades and decades. The therapy that works is a therapy in which there's a solid rapport and a good relationship between patient and therapist. The only way to really determine if you'll have a good relationship is to, try to start building one and see how it goes. Some people even have a first session with a couple of therapists to see how it feels before deciding who you want to hunker down with and start working with. And I think that's a wise thing to do.
I'm so happy that you brought that up so that people don't feel obligated to like, well, I have
Yeah.
to stick with this one therapist because I told them
Yeah.
that I'm gonna be here. Like you said,
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
have to feel it out.
Fellas, this is not like your barber. Okay, you're walking through the shop, you pick your guy, like that's your guy for the rest of your life, right? Like you can't, or you got to move to a different barbershop, right? Like that's how it works. This is not like your barber. You do not owe any loyalty to your therapist when you're first starting out, right? Like you have to be able to prioritize what works for you, and that's difficult for a lot of folks.
Yeah.
But I hope the message I'm sharing here will help alleviate some of that a little bit, so folks know, hey, I'm a therapist. I have my own practice, and it is okay. Like you need to be able to do what is best for you. I wouldn't want you to work with me if you didn't think it was best for you.
Right.
And it's okay to start with someone and switch to someone else.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you so much, Justin, for joining us today to have this
Oh, it's
conversation.
been a pleasure, Amber. Thank you so much. And congratulations again on the launch. It's really exciting.
Thank you so much. Again, let people know who you are, how they can find
Yeah,
you.
absolutely. Again, my name is Justin, aka Dr. Hop. I'm on Instagram at DRJS as in Scott Hopkins. That's Dr. JS Hopkins. That's also my email, drjshopkins@gmail.com. And Twitter, you got it, same thing, at Dr. JS Hopkins. Thanks again, everyone. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.